magic carpet ride continues. This ball club has been amazing all season long.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome to the program, episode number 30. Holy shit, I can't believe we're at number 30. I, of course, am Steve Silver, and usually joining me is Swanee, but again, he's going to be out for at least another week. But I hope everyone had themselves a fantastic Memorial Day holiday. I know that I did. A nice little 3-day weekend to sit back and kick back and, drink a little beer and have a little fun. So that was kind of nice. It was nice to get away from work for fuck's sake. Holy shit, were we busy. But, now we're back to the grind. And, of course, we're back to baseball. And, of course, the Mariners last night scored 3 runs in the bottom of the first and then did absolutely nothing the rest of the way. But their pitching was good enough, albeit Bryce Miller got in trouble a little bit there in the 5th. But held serve in the 6th, and of course the bullpen takes over. Mariners win 3-2. Now that was coming off the heels of one of the absolute worst road trips I think I've ever seen. Now, from the onset, when you look at that road trip, you're like, oh, okay, well they went 4-6, and it didn't necessarily look that bad. But when you break it down, series by series, it was absolutely disgusting. They got absolutely embarrassed in Baltimore. I don't. The way game 1 and game 3 played out, it was embarrassing. The only life the Mariners showed was in game 1 in New York when they were able to come back against Clay Holmes and to take game 1 of that series. They ended up splitting in the Bronx. Last 2 contests, I don't think were really all that close. Complete lack of offense. And then in the Washington series. Now, granted, they're not the Miami Marlins, but they're also, I would consider the Washington Nationals, a mediocre team at best. And of course, the Mariners absolutely no-showed in the first 2 games of that series before absolutely erupting for 9 against a bullpen that kind of broke down, a Nationals bullpen that broke down, and they were able to put 9 on the board. But outside of that, that series had, at one point had 4 straight losses before they were able to, to corral a win right there. When I look at that, that 10-game road trip, they were outperformed all the way around. I thought they were outpitched starting. I thought they were outpitched in the starting rotation. I thought Baltimore outpitched them. John Means and Corbin Burns outpitched them. Even in that game 1 in New York, I thought Marcus Stroman outpitched him. And then in DC, they were outpitched again. Their bullpen had a team ERA of 7.01 during that road trip. Absolutely unacceptable. And of course, their offense couldn't score consistently enough. Yes, I know they had the 9 runs there at the end, but outside of that, you're basically talking maybe 3 runs a game. As a matter of fact, for the road trip, the Mariners were outscored 51-34. 51-34. Let that sink in. Basically, they lost by an average of 5-3 per game. But it was more than that. George Kirby got dinged around pretty good on that road trip. Bryce Miller got dinged around on that road trip. Logan Gilbert was okay. He had an okay start, and then he kind of had a mediocre start. Same thing with Luis Castillo. So for the most part, this is kind of an interesting trend when you have taken a look at the starting rotation since the start of May. It's kind of trended downward a little bit. Not, they haven't necessarily fallen off a cliff. I mean, this rotation is too good to completely fall off a cliff. But that being said, for a rotation that is built around the fastball, in order for this rotation to be completely successful, they have to be able to locate the last night was a perfect example. I thought Bryce Miller was absolutely fantastic last night. And because he was able to throw that fastball for early strikes, his secondary pitches, especially his slider sweeper, was absolutely brilliant. And he was basically able to shut the door down for 4 innings before Houston was able to strike for 2. but he was able to get the ground ball to finish out the fifth, and then of course he came back and pitched well before the bullpen took over. And so that was a great way to rebound and a great way to to come off that road trip and get a pretty decent start. But I think we have to start this conversation with the offense, because I've noticed a trend. And for me, that trend is quite simple. And I asked this on Twitter or X or whatever. And before we get into it, by the way, if you guys are watching live on Twitter, or if you guys are watching live on YouTube, you can go ahead and jump into the comments, because I'd love to have a solid conversation with you guys today. But also, if you are watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. We would definitely appreciate that. Anyway, as I mentioned, I asked this question on Twitter. I want to say a couple days ago, and I asked the question: really, is this team talented? Because I've said it all the time. It's like, when you look at certain individual players, you just you can just see it. You can just say that dude's talented. Julio Rodriguez, and I know that he hasn't played great, but for a fact that guy's talented. And you see a guy like Cal Raleigh, and you're like, talented, especially against fastball, especially against the fastball sinker cutter. That dude absolutely has an unbelievable slugging percentage against against that, and exactly what he's able to do. But obviously right now, it's a little hit or miss. But the thing about it is, the reason why I asked this question was it was quite simple. 2 years ago, this Mariner team, with the same young core, the same pieces, J.P. Crawford, Cal Raleigh, Julio Rodriguez, Dylan Moore, these guys, made the playoffs. Mitch Haniger was a part of that crew. These guys made the playoffs 1 year after these guys broke onto the scene, had an unbelievable 90-win season. They were joined with Suarez and Winker and Adam Kennedy. They traded for Carlos Santana, Luis Castillo, and obviously they made a run. Not much has changed 2 years later. And my simple question was, how come this team isn't 2 years better? Because you would expect it. The maturation of a Major League Baseball player doesn't necessarily go down. It either stays even or it skyrockets. And now here we are 2 years later, asking the question of whether or not this team is talented, whether or not this team gets talent. Because, with a pitching staff as good as the Mariners have, and I'll say it, I'll say it, then I'll scream it until my voice goes hoarse, and I'll scream it until the cows come home. This pitching staff is good enough to win a World Series. Yes, there's holes, and yes, they do need to shore up the bullpen, absolutely. But the starting rotation is good enough to win a World Series. So what is it that is holding this team back? Is it talent? Is it the front office? Or is it ownership? What is it? Is it a combination of all three? Is it a philosophical? Because I think Scott Servais talked about it yesterday in the post game, and I think Cal Raleigh was quoted that that they have to they have to hit fastball. This team is built around hitting the fastball, and it's something that they haven't been able to do. No excuses, blah blah blah, same old. And yet, when you watch this team, and yet you watch a team that allegedly is talented continue to foul off middle fastball, because all they're doing is sitting on breaking pitches. They're sitting on slider. You know what I mean? And, they continue to struggle against the fastball. One has to wonder whether or not this is a philosophical issue or whether or not this is something more. And so, I like to dive in, and I like to ask these questions because the Mariners got rid of Suarez, they got rid of Teoscar Hernandez, and they got rid of Jarrett Kelenic, supposedly because of the high strikeout rates. And they bring in Garver, they bring in Polanco, they brought back Haniger, and we've seen a lot of strikeouts. And so, and I'm like, well, wait a second. We know what Haniger could do. We've seen Haniger. He was here. We know what Haniger is able to do. And then I thought about it, and I'm like, oh, Haniger's 33 years old. He got a late start. He's 33 in his 8th season. And when you break down his first and second half splits, they're pretty much the same. They're pretty, they're good. They're not bad. He's, his second half stats are just a touch better than his first half stats, but for the most, he is, equal parts first half and second half when it comes to production. The other guy that we signed to a 2-year deal was Mitch Garver, who, by the way, is 33 years old. Just like Haniger, 33 years old. And he also is in his 8th season, so another late starter. But there's a difference. Mitch Garver is better in the second half than he is in the first half. Historically speaking, when you look at his career splits, he is a second half performer to the tune of hitting 271 with a 362 OBP, a 534 slugging, and an 896 OPS. 41 home runs, 41 career second half home runs, 117 runs batted in. For the second half, starting in July, August, September. The big piece that we got was Jorge Polanco, who's 31 years old. And he's in his 11th season, so there's tread on the tire. There's not a lot of tread left on that tire. Excuse me. But he's also a second half performer. Statistically speaking, throughout his career, he performs better in the second half than he is in the first half. And of course, he went on the DL. We'll get to that in just a second. But career in the second half, he hits 278, 342 OBP, slugging 418 with an 810 OPS, 60 second half bombs, 136 runs batted in. But the thing that kind of gets to me a little bit is the fact that these guys are on the wrong side of 30, and especially Polanco, who's got that little track record of injuries, and now of course Ryan Bliss gets called up in his place. You wonder. A lot was made about Haniger and his health issues coming into the season. And we thought that maybe, Polanco was going to be a little bit more steadier of the two, but here we are. Haniger's still healthy, and Polanco gets his first DL stint at a time where Wheel can afford it, but nonetheless, second half performer. The other guy that is worth talking about is Julio Rodriguez. Now, this is going to be his 3rd season, okay? In the first half of the season, Julio Rodriguez's career is hitting 262 with a 323 OBP, slugging 443 with a 766 OPS, an OPS plus of 91, 203 strikeouts to 54 walks as a career first half player. In the second half, Julio Rodriguez is hitting 306 with a 362 OBP, slugging 577 with a 939 OPS. His OPS plus is 131 in the second half. Only 117 strikeouts to 33 walks, but also, his power is virtually the same. Although he does hit a little bit more RBIs in the first half than he does the second half, but power-wise, it goes up a little bit, in the tune of home runs and a little bit of doubles. And his best month is August. August for Julio Rodriguez is he goes absolutely Super Saiyan. He's also pretty good in September as well too. So, the question then becomes, okay, so we've just highlighted that for the most part, the key guys, the key cogs that were brought in, plus guys like Julio Rodriguez and Cal Raleigh, we'll get to Cal in just a sec. That it's not necessarily an issue of talent, it's just an issue of timing. It's not an issue of talent, it's an issue of timing. It very well could be that what this team is a second half team. Which is actually not a bad thing. By the way, Cal Raleigh is a better performer away from T-Mobile than he is at T-Mobile. His career home, he's only batting .208 with a 272 OBP, slugging .385 with a 657 OPS, an OPS plus of 81, 25 home runs, 66 RBIs, 194 strikeouts to 52 walks on the road. He's batting .224 with a 300 OBP, slugging .504 with an 804 OPS, 118 OPS plus, 45 home runs, 114 runs batted in. So statistically speaking, he is a better road player than he is a home player. And he's also a better second half player as well too. 220 in the second half, 283 OBP, slugging .465 with the 479 OPS, 103 OPS plus, and he's hitting 11 more home runs, 11 more RBI. So again, when you look at this, for me, it's not necessarily talent. It's not even an issue of consistency for me, because I think we're going to see that as this thing swings into June and as we get into July, we're actually going to see how this offense and why this offense was created. I know it's hard to see right now, but when you just look at basic splits, you will see that these guys are better second half performers than they are in the first half, especially Julio Rodriguez. I mean, the difference between first and second half numbers just jump off the page, especially when you get into August and September. He is that guy in the second half of the season. And I guess that answers that question. Which kind of lets you know why they gave him the contract. Even though it's a contract I didn't agree with at the time, but that being said, everybody asked that question. How come they haven't went out and got that, traded for that big bat or signed that big bat? Because they believe they have that big bat. And that guy is Julio Rodriguez. It's just he hasn't yet to put together a full season. He is literally a second half player. The only guy that you can really look at and say, okay, well, judging by his splits is, judging by his splits as far as production goes, is going to be Mitch Haniger. Those first and second half splits are identical, damn near identical. So production wise, that's the guy who is going to be even, who's going to give you production first and second half, although this year not so much. And so the question is Haniger past his prime? Or is it he's just getting back into the swing of things? That's a good question. Because when I look at Haniger, 33, I look at Garver, 33, and I look at Polanco, 31, all on the wrong side of 30, and especially Polanco with the injury issues and the fact that he's now in his 11th season at 31. The question is whether or not these guys are potentially out of their prime. It's not unheard of to think that a guy who's 31 could be on the backside of his productive years, like a guy like Jorge Polanco. Because it baffles me. It really does, because, you would think that a team that has the exact same nucleus, the exact same core players, the exact same approach to hitting 2 years ago makes a playoff run. And 2 years later, they're not 2 years better. And I read Mariners social media all the time. I see it all the time. Everybody wants to point to ownership. Everybody wants to point to ownership because they didn't go out and get Juan Soto, or they wouldn't, trade for him and bring in his payroll. How the Mariners have, sat idly and really just got like B-level free agents, or refused to trade some prospects because they didn't want to tack on payroll. And I don't know, man, that's kind of, to me, that's where the rub is. Because when I look at this lineup and I'm like, okay, well, I understand the straw. I mean, shit, when you looked at this last 10-game road trip and you're looking at the fact that this team literally does not know how to manufacture runs, which is like the baseline of even a mediocre offense. Like, Washington's offense is not great. I mean, for fuck's sake, they have Jesse Winker in their lineup, a guy that was cast off after one season in Seattle because he couldn't hit. He's there. It's not a great lineup. It's certainly not the shittiest lineup I've ever seen. I mean, it's not Chicago. It's not Miami. They're a 500 team. They have the ability to tack on runs, but you're watching Washington play small ball and manufacture runs and beating a team that probably, the Mariners should, in a 10-game series, the Mariners should easily win 9 out of 10 with the talent that this team has. Like, there is never a situation where you should absolutely get embarrassed, whether you're in Seattle or in DC, to the Washington Nationals. The talent is just too good. So the question is, why? Is there something that you can point to and you can blame? Now, I've always said that for me, it's philosophical. The whole control the zone thing, to me, I think it gives them too much information, and I think when certain players step up to the plate, they have too much information in their head. They have a lot that they're processing, and of course, they're trying to simplify it. Okay, so if 65% of the time they're seeing something off speed, they're going to sit there and wait for an off speed pitch that's in the zone, so they can pull or they can go the other way, whatever the case may be. And because of it, they're fouling the fuck off of fastballs that they, middle fastballs that they should crush, and they're not doing it. So, to me, I think, I think these guys have a little bit too much information going up into the plate instead of just going up there. And listen, there's this old saying in baseball where if you're thinking, you're hurting the team. Too much thinking hurts the team. And it makes a lot of sense because, I mean, we're still dealing with young players that are within the first 6 years. And of course, they're trying to establish themselves. But that being said, you also have to ask that question is, why isn't this team 2 years better? Why do they keep doing the exact same shit? And of course, that notion was backed up because Scott Service mentioned it in I think he mentioned in an article with Shannon Dreyer, where he said that they have been trying to simplify things, where they're not necessarily giving them all the information because they want to keep them laser focused on hitting fastballs. which is actually kind of embarrassing when you really think about it. We're talking about major league players that need to have things simplified. So, but when I take a step back and I look at all the advanced metrics, even some of the traditional stats and some of these things, I have to ask myself, is it a combination of talent versus we have potential, we have veterans that might be a little bit over their prime? Or is this just as simple as this really is a second half team? Because we've seen it. 2021 got red hot in the second half. 2022, they got red hot in the second half. 2023, they got red hot in the second half. So maybe this is really what this team is, where they tread water for the first 3 months of the season. You're going to have some embarrassing series where this team literally just can't do fuck all. And then all of a sudden come June, like a switch of, like turning on a light switch, all of a sudden things get put together. And maybe we're seeing that because Julio Rodriguez over the course of the last 3 games, all of a sudden now you look at his exit, you look at his batted ball data, and you look at his exit velo, and all of a sudden there's Julio again. JP Crawford, since he's come back, it looks like his swing is a little different. It looks like he's kind of locked in. And of course, quietly, Mitch Garver has started to put some things together. One of the things that I've been screaming at over the course of the last 3 weeks is slugging. This team does not slug enough. And it almost feels like that's starting to turn the corner as well too. Where's the value of Ty France? The Ty France of old that uses the entire field. That's where that guy's value is. It's not necessarily pull power down the left field line. It's singles and doubles and using the gaps. And all of a sudden, what have we seen over the course of the last couple of games? Ty France is using the entire field. So it's I look at this as I wouldn't even use the word complicated. I wouldn't even say that. It's more or less just understanding what this team is and understanding that there's going to be some frustration. But I encourage everyone, absolutely, I encourage everyone just to look at basic splits between first half and second half, home and road, and you're going to get an idea of just who is and who isn't, especially within the division. When you look at splits within the division, you'll see certain players that absolutely just crush. And and of course now we're in the Houston series, and of course last night the Mariners manufactured 3 runs in the top of the first. I mean, they were I thought that was a missed opportunity yesterday against Framber Valdez. They get 3 in the first, and they were right there in the second. They had 2 on in the second and could have broken that thing wide open. And of course they let Valdez off the hook, who eventually got comfortable for the rest of his start. But of course, their pitching is good enough to hold off those type of wins. And of course tonight, Luis Castillo goes, who on that 10-game road trip had a pretty decent start in a losing effort. Had a decent start in a game that the team won in Baltimore, but for the most part, when I look at this starting rotation and bullpen over the scope of the last 10 games, dude, they got fucking outpitched, which was it wasn't so surprising in the Baltimore series. I mean, John Means and Corbin Burns, more Corbin Burns than John Means, but John Means did pitch incredibly well. And even in the opening game of the Yankees series where Marcus Stroman goes 7, I mean, they were outpitched in the starting rotation. George Kirby got whacked around. Bryce Miller before last night's start. His 2 starts on that road trip, he kind of got knocked around as well too. And the bullpen, middle relief especially, absolutely crushed. And of course they they made a couple moves, bringing in Mike Bauman from Baltimore, and then they got the kid from the Dodgers who was a DFA candidate. But that was more surprising than anything. Watching New York, Baltimore, and especially Washington outpitch our starters. To me, it's unacceptable with the level of talent. But that being said, sometimes that does happen. But last night was off to a good start, and there's another opportunity tonight with Luis Castillo going in a matchup that I actually do think favors the Mariners more than it does the Astros. But again, the question is, are we going to see the good or the bad? What are we going to see? Are we going to see a situation where it's going to start off with 2 strikeouts in the first, and then all of a sudden it has a trickle down effect where our offense is going to be put in a situation where they're going to have to be able to come back late? All that does is put pressure on the starting rotation, and of course we saw that on the road trip. It's like, why would what makes you think that these guys are going to be able to hold the line like that? As a starting pitcher, knowing, like, last night was a perfect example. I mean, Bryce had a 3-run lead right after one, and he was able to execute his game plan of how he wanted to attack the Astros. And yeah, of course, he got knocked around there in that 5th, but for the most part, he was calm, and he was able to throw his fastball for strikes. And of course, that just made his secondary pitches absolutely lethal. I hadn't seen the break on his slider as we saw last night in a long time. And it's a mental thing. These things are mental, right? When your starting pitcher knows that he's going to be able to work with a 3-run lead or a 5-run lead or whatever the case may be, they get to settle down. They get to settle in and be able to execute a game plan where otherwise they would feel like they have to be perfect. They have to locate, they have to throw strikes, and that's when mistakes get made. George Kirby is a very good example of that. When you looked at his start in Baltimore, when you looked at his start in DC, he felt like he had to be perfect. And when you feel like you have, like, every pitch matters because you don't want to get ahead, or you don't want to fall behind an account, or you don't want to do anything to you don't want to put a fastball in a spot in the zone where that's going to get crushed, and then all of a sudden you get too fine, and that's exactly what happens. You hang a changeup in the zone, and all of a sudden that gets crushed. Fastballs all of a sudden look like beach balls, and the next thing you know, you're down 3-0 in a blink of an eye, and then all of a sudden now your offense is put in a position where they have to come back. They absolutely have no choice, and of course, because this offense can't manufacture runs, and so far we've seen them rely on a 3-run home run. Well, if that doesn't come, you're in a no-win situation. And that's right. That is the first half offense, and it's vastly different than what we're going to see in June, July, and August. Specifically, starting in mid-June, but July and August are going to be probably the 2 hottest. And the question is whether or not that's going to have carryover into September. Last year, we didn't necessarily see it a lot. As a matter of fact, we didn't see it at all. Mariners choked off September last year, but September of 2021, 2022, they were able to hold serve, and especially it paid off in September of 2022 as they obviously got to the playoffs. But I look at this and I say, okay, cool. When I look at guys like JP, and I look at Julio, and I look at Cal Raleigh, I see 3 young core players that are immensely talented, who still have yet to learn how to put together a full season. The good news is their best months are in the summertime. And the great part about the 2024 season is that the Mariners are in first place. This isn't something of the last two seasons where by the time Memorial Day rolled around, they were 5 games behind or 8 games behind, and all of a sudden you have to dig yourself out of a hole in June just to get to the summer months where you can make a run, and then you're in the swing of the wild card. Because Houston started the season with a lot of injuries, and because Texas started the season with some injuries, all of a sudden now the Mariners are in first place by a little bit. Now, what sucks about the fact that the Mariners are not a fast starting team, they should be like 10 games. They should be leading this division by 10 games by now. Like that's the rub. That's the shitty part about the whole thing. Is you look at it and you're like, why isn't this team like outpacing Texas and Houston? Which, by the way, Houston, if you looked at Houston's last 10, all of a sudden they're starting to look like it's going to progress right. It's going to start progressing right for them. So this actually is a huge series for the Mariners, and they obviously took game 1 yesterday. But if this, like, the key is not just in the scope of the quarter pull to quarter pull to quarter pull to quarter pull. It's month by month by month, right? So if you know that you're playing 25 games in a month, the idea is if you can win 15 games a month, barely just, like, I hate to use this term, but if you can win 54% of your games in a month, it's not great. You're not playing 600 ball, which is what you would like to see, 20 wins in a month, or, in that 18 to 20 win range. But that being said, if you can just play 500 or just a little bit better than 500 in a month, you're going to be able to hold serve until you actually get to the months where historically, you kick the shit out of the baseball. And of course that's, July and August and September. So I look at this and I just say, okay, cool. It's hard not to get frustrated. I understand, because I watch it too, and I see the inconsistency. If you look at my tag name, it says consistently inconsistent, because that's, that is April, that is May, and that's, in this window, in this cycle of what I like to call the championship window. That's what it's been. And it's just having that understanding of knowing that certain guys are learning. The guys who were brought in to lead haven't necessarily been doing it, but it doesn't mean that they won't. And we're going to know super quick. We're going to know super quick if it's true. If Haniger, Garver, and Polanco are past their primes, we're going to know it. And we're going to know it. Like, I can excuse the start of the season. I can do that easily, because when I look at things that they've done historically in their career, and you see that guys like Garver and Polanco are second half players, and you add that to what our current young core is, it leads me to believe that come July and August, Garver, Polanco at the very least are going to be able to rebound and actually lead this team and actually put up big numbers, even if it's only for a 2 month span. You take it, because that's going to add up come September. The question for me is going to be Mitch Haniger. That to me was a big disappointment. I knew Mitch was going to be healthy, but I thought he was going to be a little bit productive, because career wise in the first half he's actually been pretty productive. So far, not so much. He struck out a little bit more than I like to see. But that being said, though, he's also productive in the second half, and we're gonna find out whether or not there's any tread left on those tires. So when I to sum this up, it all makes sense now. As much like I was right there fucking with most fans where you go into an offseason, especially 2023, going into that season when the Mariners didn't do much in the offseason. And there were good bats available, and all it cost you was money. That's the most fucked up part about the entire thing. Is I understand not wanting to give up years. Jerry Dipoto has a very public. He's very public and has been very public with the desire to not build teams on long-term contracts. Long-term contracts are albatross contracts, which is why, when we signed Robbie Cano to that 10-year deal, it was a problem because in the scope of a 10-year deal, you're only going to get 3 very good years. The first 3, generally speaking, the first 3 years are going to be it. You might be able to get 5 out of it, but you're only going to get 3 very good years. And when you sign a player to a deal like that, you're doing it to win a championship in the first 3 years, which, that's why, giving Cano that huge ass contract made no sense because the Mariners were nowhere near the playoffs, let alone a World Series. And it became an albatross. And of course, the PED violation that embarrassed the team, which is why they got rid of him. And of course, I would probably assume that when Jerry got hired, that was known right away that those type of contracts weren't going to be there. That if they were going to hand out those type of contracts, it was going to be for a homegrown star. And sure enough, they gave it to Julio Rodriguez, who they feel is that type of player. That on the open market, that's the type of deal that he would get. And it made sense giving it to him when they did. And now it's an issue of, for me at least, when I look back on this and I'm thinking to myself, okay, cool. That's why they did it. Because when you look at the second half, when you look at second halves and you start seeing production, and that's usually when he turns into an MVP candidate. Over the course of 2022, 2023, Julio Rodriguez had these starts. And then all of a sudden, by the time he finishes the season, he's like, a top 5 MVP candidate. So I don't have any problem, right? I don't have any problems right now as long as they're able to hold serve, do just enough to win ball games. And for me right now, that's all about manufacturing runs and not necessarily relying on the home run. Hold serve until you're going to be able to get into those windows where all of a sudden the offense is just, is fantastic, and the Mariners are actually playing the game the way that they're supposed to be playing the game. So, it's going to be a give and take, and I think that really comes down to just, the sport of what we're talking about, which is baseball. It's a long month, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and there's going to be you're going to have ebbs and flows. You're going to have peaks and valleys, but I think most definitely there's still work to be done with this roster. When I look at this thing, I see things that are incomplete. I see areas of where we can get better, and if there is an opportunity out there to bring in a first baseman or a third baseman or another corner outfield, and all it takes is prospects, that I'm firing that gun. I have no problem dealing prospects in order for making this roster better. I have no problem dealing prospects to bring in another wipeout high leverage arm in the bullpen. I have no qualms, because when you look at where this team is going to be in about a month and a half, I probably would assume that they're still going to be in first place. That I have a feeling the Mariners are going to be able to hold serve and get into July, get into the All-Star break in first place. I have no doubt about it. The pitching is going to be able to keep us, within the margin of error. And I would assume that within the course of the next month and a half, this offense is going to be looking a little bit different, and we're going to be able to put some distance. But again, the way that I look at this is, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think that when it comes down to it, I'm not a big control the zone guy. but ultimately it comes down to player production, and we're going to find out quickly what the veteran leadership on this team is. We're going to find out whether or not they're going to be able to produce, and clearly they're going to need these guys back healthy and ready to go, especially Polanco. Losing that bat for even a couple weeks is going to be a big blow. Because we saw Ryan Bliss last night. Having a guy like Ryan Bliss and Jonathan Clase in the lineup is a detriment, not an addition. And at least they're batting Julio in the third spot. That was absolutely good to see. That's where Julio needs to be. And if Scott Service can actually put this lineup together the way it was intended to be, it's probably going to be better than it is. I think it's going to get better than it's going to stay the same. So anyway, interesting series. I liked that they were able to manufacture early. I'd like to see that trend continue tonight because, again, Houston's been good, man. Houston's been very, very, very good over the course of the last 10, and they themselves surprisingly have started to get healthy. When I look at the complexity of the American League West, I think we all knew that the LA Angels were going to be bad. 13 games below 500, they're pretty much done. Even though I thought Oakland was going to be that scrappy team, and they are going to be that scrappy team. But they're probably barking on a 90-loss campaign too. But they're going to be fun. Houston, my biggest thing with Houston was I understand how they started, but when you look at a team like Houston that has been to 7 straight league championship series, had been to a couple World Series, won a couple World Series, until they're actually eliminated, I'm never going to count out the Houston Astros. Period, point blank. You just can't do it. That team knows how to win. They have the veteran leadership. They're going to spend money, and eventually they're going to get healthy. They're going to get a Curdy back, and they're going to get Lance McCullers back. They got Verlander back, and once that rotation is 100% healthy, that's going to be a monster team. They're going to be able to pitch, and of course, if they're going to be able to get quality starts, their bullpen's going to be able to shorten the game, and they're not necessarily going to have to rely on middle relief, which has been the big bugaboo with the Houston Astros, is that middle relief force. Same with the Mariners. So the question for me is going to be Texas. The interesting thing is the Houston Astros have proven that they can go on deep run after deep run after deep run after deep run and not have that carryover fatigue into the next season. For me, the question is with Texas is whether or not there's going to be a World Series hangover, and whether or not that's going to prevent them, and also whether or not they're going to be able to stay healthy. But that being said, both teams spend at the deadline. That's going to be the X factor. Are the Mariners going to recognize this, and also are they going to be a part of the arms race come the deadline, because they're going to need it. They're absolutely going to need it, and this cannot be what they did in 2021 when they got rid of Kendall Graveman for Abraham Toro, and then last year when they sold off Paul Sewald for Rojas, Bliss, and Canzone. It has to be 2022 when you're going out there and absolutely bringing in a gun, and that's what's going to have to happen this year. But all I'm going to say is for those Mariner fans out there that are worried, I understand it. But that being said, I think we know now that this team is primed and ready to do what they've done over the course of the last 3 years, which is get hot in the second half and make a run. The only difference is they're in first place now. They're not 5 to 8 games back. So I want to thank everybody for stopping by. Again, last week, last couple of weeks, we haven't had Swanee. He's been dealing with some family issues back on the East Coast. I think he should be back next week, and so that's going to be fun. Of course, you can always catch me on X at Swinging Pod. I'm down to talk baseball any time of the week, and of course, we'll be back next week. Before we go, I do want to say this though, because as we do every single week when we forecast coming up. So we have 2 more against the Houston Astros. 3 more against the Astros, and then we have 3 against the Angels. By the time this rolls around next week, the Mariners will be starting a 3-game series in Oakland. And for me, I would like if the Mariners can split against the Astros, maybe that might seem like the most realistic. Obviously, you want to press for 3 or 4, if not a sweep. But if you can split with the Astros and then sweep the Angels by this time next week, you're talking a 5-2 homestand. If that's what ends up happening, and of course we start seeing the slugging peripherals, we start seeing the exit velos, and we start seeing the batted ball data, that is going to suggest that we are getting into that time of year where we start averaging 5-6 runs a game. If that happens over the course of this week, and we're still able to do the great things that we have done, which is work deep into counts and also work into bullpens early, then I'll be absolutely happy. 5-2 on this homestand, and we'll be setting ourselves up for the summer months. So go Mariners. And I want to thank everybody for stopping by, and we'll see you next week. Have a great day.